They tied the Apache twins for stealing bread. One quiet rancher changed their fate. In this quiet town, life was hard for most people, but for some, it was nearly impossible. Among those struggling were the Apache twins, two young teenagers who had lost both their parents to illness the previous year. Life without their parents had been cruel, and they had learned quickly that the world did not offer mercy to the weak. The twins, barely old enough to be considered young adults, had to fend for themselves. They knew how to hunt small animals and gather roots, but the desert was harsh, and food was never guaranteed. For days, they had wandered, trying to find something to eat, but every small creature they caught was barely enough to satisfy their hunger. Their stomachs rumbled constantly, a reminder that survival was never easy. On that particular day, hunger drove them to make a desperate decision. They had heard that the town's general store kept bread stacked near the window, and it seemed to call to them with a promise of relief. The twins approached quietly, their bare feet crunching softly on the dry sand. They knew it was wrong to take what did not belong to them, but hunger can make people act against their better judgment. As they reached the store, the twins exchanged a glance. They had always shared a deep bond, an unspoken understanding that made them act as one. One twin distracted the shopkeeper by pretending to be interested in some goods displayed outside, while the other slipped inside and quietly took a loaf of bread. It was a small loaf, but to them it was a lifeline, a momentary escape from the gnawing hunger that had haunted them for days. But fate was not on their side. Just as they were about to leave, a loud voice shouted, "Stop!" "Thieves!" The twins froze, their hearts pounding like drums. The shopkeeper, a stern man with little patience for lawlessness, had seen them. The townspeople, curious from the sound of the shouting, began to gather. What had started as a desperate act for survival was about to become a public spectacle. The twins were quickly surrounded. They were small, young, and frightened, but the townspeople showed no mercy. The sheriff, a man who prided himself on maintaining order, arrived and examined the scene. He was used to criminals, but he rarely saw children accused of theft. Some members of the crowd whispered about the harshness of punishing young children, but most demanded a visible punishment, believing that setting an example would keep others from stealing. The sheriff made a decision. "Tie them up," he said, his voice carrying over the murmur of the crowd. The twins looked at each other, fear evident in their wide eyes. The thought of being tied, left exposed for everyone to see, made their stomachs churn. They had heard of harsh punishments before, but nothing had prepared them for the humiliation and pain they were about to endure. Ropes were quickly secured around their wrists and ankles. The twins were forced to sit on the hot ground as the ropes cut into their skin. Dust swirled around them, sticking to their sweat-covered faces. The townspeople gathered closer, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others leaning in with a grim satisfaction, as if watching them suffer would make their own lives feel more secure. The twins did not speak. Words would not help, and the heat made it difficult to think. They huddled close together, offering each other the only comfort they had left. Their bond, stronger than the ropes that bound them, gave them a quiet strength. They remembered their parents' teachings, to be kind, even when others were cruel, and to survive without losing their dignity. Hours passed, and the sun moved slowly across the sky. The twins felt every sting of the rope, every uncomfortable shift of the hot sand beneath them, but worse than the physical pain was the fear of what would happen next. The townspeople discussed their punishment, debating whether it should be more severe. Some suggested sending them to the county jail. Others argued that children like them could be rehabilitated if someone cared enough to help them. Yet, no one stepped forward immediately. Most were content to leave the twins to suffer, thinking that a lesson in fear would keep them from stealing again. The twins remained silent, their eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of mercy. Occasionally, someone would glance at them with a hint of pity, but no one dared act. The twins began to wonder if anyone ever would. As the day wore on, the twins' hope began to fade. Hunger gnawed at them again, and the harsh sun made their skin sting. Their small bodies were exhausted, yet they remained bound, unable to move freely. The crowd began to thin slightly as some people returned to their homes or shops, but a few lingered, watching the twins with a mix of curiosity and judgment. Just when it seemed that the day would end in despair, a shadow fell over the twins. A figure approached quietly, walking with a calm, deliberate pace that drew the attention of some townspeople. It was a rancher, a man who kept mostly to himself and lived on the outskirts of town. He had heard of the twins' capture and had come to see for himself what had happened. The rancher was not a large man, but there was a quiet strength in his presence. He observed the twins for a moment, noting their exhaustion, the cuts on their wrists from the ropes and the fear in their eyes. He felt a pang of sympathy. He had lived a hard life himself, understanding better than most that desperation could drive people to acts they would not normally commit. He walked closer, his voice calm but firm. "This is not right," he said, speaking more to the crowd than to the twins. Some of the townspeople scoffed at him, others looked away, uncomfortable with the challenge to their judgment. The rancher continued, "They are just children. They are hungry and scared. Punishing them like this will not teach them anything except fear." The twins listened, their hearts lifting slightly at the sound of his words. It was the first sign that someone might understand them, that someone might care. They clung to that hope, small as it was, because they had been without kindness for so long. The rancher did not stop there. He spoke of mercy, of compassion, and of the difference between justice and cruelty. He reminded the townspeople that survival was not always a matter of choice, and that sometimes people acted out of necessity rather than malice. His words were measured and calm, but they carried weight, shaking the certainty of those who had been ready to leave the twins to their suffering. The twins' eyes followed him, silently pleading for any help he could offer. The rancher looked at them directly, seeing the fear and determination in their gaze. He saw two children who had already suffered too much, and decided that he would do what he could to change their fate. The thought of leaving them tied in the sun while the crowd debated their lives filled him with a quiet determination. By the time the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the dusty street, the twins were still bound, but the mood had shifted slightly. The rancher had planted a seed of doubt in the minds of the townspeople. Some began to leave quietly, unable to continue watching the twins suffer. Others lingered but no longer spoke as loudly. The twins, sensing a small victory, drew closer to each other, finding strength in their shared hope. The day had been long, hot, and filled with fear. Yet in the midst of that fear, the twins felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since their parents had passed. Someone had seen them not as criminals, but as children caught in circumstances beyond their control. The rancher's quiet courage had begun to change the course of their lives, even if the townspeople did not yet fully understand it. As night approached and the air cooled slightly, the twins remained bound but no longer completely hopeless. They waited, hearts heavy but spirits lifted slightly, for the moment when their fate might change. In that quiet town, under the fading light of the desert sun, the stage was set for a story of courage, compassion, and survival, one that would soon alter the lives of the Apache twins forever. The quiet rancher had been watching the twins for some time, standing at the edge of the town's dusty street as the sun beat down on their small, weary bodies. He had always preferred the company of animals and wide open spaces to the noise of townspeople, but he could not ignore the sight before him. The twins, small faces, streaked with dust and sweat, showed fear and confusion that tugged at his heart. He had lived a hard life himself, understanding better than most that hunger and desperation could drive people to act in ways they would not normally choose. The rancher's name was Elias, a man in his 50s who had spent most of his life tending to his land and cattle. He was known in the area as quiet and reserved, rarely speaking unless necessary, and never involving himself in the petty conflicts of the town. Yet there was a fairness in him, a sense of justice that guided his actions more than rules or tradition ever could. Seeing the twins tied and suffering sparked a feeling in him that he could not ignore. He felt an urge to step forward, to do something, even if it meant challenging the opinion of the townspeople. Elias approached slowly, his boots stirring the fine sand as he walked toward the twins. His shadow stretched long across the street as he reached the crowd, who had begun to murmur amongst themselves. "Leave them alone," he said quietly but firmly, his voice cutting through the chatter. The crowd turned to look at him, some frowning, some curious, some annoyed. Elias ignored them. His eyes stayed fixed on the twins, who looked back at him with a mix of fear and hope. "They are just children," he continued. "Punishing them like this will not teach them right from wrong. They are hungry, scared, and alone. Show some mercy." His words were calm but carried an authority born not from position but from experience. Some townspeople scoffed. "Mercy they stole from the store," a man shouted. "They must be punished," others muttered, unsure what to say. Elias' presence and words had unsettled them. It was rare for anyone in the town to question the law, even when the law seemed harsh. The twins watched silently, their wrists and ankles sore from the ropes that cut into their skin. One of them whispered to the other, "Do you think he will help us?" The other shook his head slightly, not daring to hope, yet clinging to the possibility that someone cared. Hunger gnawed at them, and their bodies ached from being tied in the hot sun. They had never expected kindness from strangers in a world that had been mostly cruel. Elias crouched down slightly to be closer to their level. "I know life has been hard for you," he said gently. "You've been forced to make choices you didn't want to make, but that does not mean you are bad. You are still children, and children deserve a chance to learn and grow." His words were not just for the twins, they were for the townspeople too. Some of them shifted uncomfortably, realizing that perhaps they had been too quick to judge. The twins exchanged a glance. They could feel the sincerity in Elias' voice, and it was a feeling they had almost forgotten existed. Someone saw them not as thieves or troublemakers, but as children who were trying to survive. It was a small gesture, but it carried enormous weight in their hearts. They tightened their grip on each other's hand, drawing strength from the connection that had kept them alive all these months. Elias stood up slowly, scanning the crowd. "I will take care of them," he said firmly. "They will not be punished further. They will come with me." There was silence. Some townspeople were stunned, unable to believe that Elias would go against what they thought was proper justice. Others whispered among themselves, unsure if they agreed with him but reluctant to challenge a man who was respected for his wisdom and fairness. The twins' eyes widened as they realized what he meant. He wanted to take them away from this place, away from the ropes, away from the fear. They did not know if they could trust him completely, but after months of surviving on their own and facing cruelty wherever they went, his offer felt like a lifeline. Elias reached out carefully, untying the ropes from their wrists and ankles, his hands steady and gentle. The twins rubbed their sore wrists, blinking at the sudden freedom, and then looked up at him with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. As they walked away from the crowd, Elias stayed close, keeping a protective presence between them and the townspeople. The twins shuffled beside him, still wary, still unsure what awaited them at his ranch. They had heard of ranchers before, but most of the stories were of men who were strict, demanding, and unkind to outsiders. Elias, however, seemed different. His calm demeanor and quiet confidence suggested that he cared more about people than rules. The journey to the ranch was slow, not just because of the twins' exhaustion, but also because Elias wanted them to see that they were safe. He talked to them quietly, asking about their lives, what they had been through, and how they survived. The twins were hesitant at first, unsure if anyone would understand, but Elia's gentle questions encouraged them to share. They told him about their parents, how sickness had taken them, and the challenges they faced alone in the harsh desert. Elias listened patiently, never judging, never interrupting. He nodded occasionally, offering small words of comfort. "You have been very brave," he said. "Most people would have given up a long time ago, but you kept going even when it was hard. That shows strength, even if others cannot see it." His words gave the twins a new feeling they had almost forgotten, pride in themselves, a sense that they were more than just the sum of their misfortunes. When they finally arrived at Elia's ranch, the twins were amazed. The land stretched wide, dotted with green pastures, wooden fences, and the occasional grazing cow. It was unlike the dusty town, harsh and unwelcoming. Here, there was space to breathe, to move, and to think. Elias led them to a small, simple house on the property. Inside, it was clean, with a fire already prepared and a few basic furnishings. It was modest, but it radiated care and safety, a stark contrast to the harshness of the town they had just left behind. Elias gave them food, something warm and filling, which they ate eagerly. Their stomachs ached from hunger, but they did not eat greedily. They remembered the lessons of survival their parents had taught them, to take only what you need and to respect what you are given. As they ate, Elias watched them quietly, feeling a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he had made the right choice. He had stepped forward when most others would have looked away, and the twins' relief and trust were proof that courage and kindness could make a difference. After the meal, Elias took them outside to introduce them to the ranch animals. The twins were fascinated by the cows, chickens, and horses. It was a world they had not known before, one where life could be simple and rewarding if one worked patiently and with care. Elias explained the routines of ranch life, how to feed the animals, tend the crops, and respect the land. The twins listened eagerly, understanding that this was not just about survival, but about learning a way to live with dignity. As the sun began to set over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the twins felt something they had not felt in a long time: hope. They realized that their lives could change, that they could grow up safe, fed, and guided by someone who cared about them. Elias, standing quietly beside them, understood that this was only the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, learning the ways of the ranch, adapting to rules, and dealing with the judgments of others. But he also knew that with patience and care, the twins could thrive. That night, as the twins slept in a small room in the ranch house, their minds filled with the events of the day. They thought of the sun-beaten street, the ropes that had bound them, and the angry voices of the townspeople. But more than that, they thought of Elias, the quiet rancher who had seen their fear and desperation and had chosen to act with courage and compassion. They drifted off to sleep with a sense of safety, for the first time in many months feeling that someone truly cared for their well-being. Outside, Elias sat by the fire, watching the stars emerge in the clear desert sky. He knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. The twins had endured much, and the world outside the ranch would not always be forgiving. But he also knew that he had taken the first step in changing their lives, showing them that kindness could exist even in a harsh and unforgiving world. And in that quiet moment, under the vast, star-strewn sky, Elias felt a quiet hope, knowing that sometimes one person's courage could rewrite the story of another's life. The next morning, the desert sun rose slowly, casting a golden light over the wide fields of the ranch. The twins awoke to a world very different from the dusty, harsh streets of the town. For the first time in many weeks, they felt the comforting warmth of safety and the quiet rhythm of life that was not dominated by fear. They were still nervous, still wary of strangers, but the presence of Elias, the quiet rancher who had saved them, gave them a sense of security they had not known in a long time. Breakfast was simple but nourishing. Elias had prepared eggs, bread, and fresh milk from the cows he tended. The twins ate hungrily, yet carefully, savoring each bite. They could feel the strength returning to their bodies, the kind of strength that came not just from food, but from knowing they were cared for. Elias watched them as they ate, his quiet eyes observing not just their hunger, but the subtle signs of their fear and uncertainty. He understood that feeding their bodies was only the first step. He would also need to feed their minds and spirits. After breakfast, Elias led them outside to begin their first lessons in ranch life. The twins had never worked with animals before, and the sheer size of the cows and horses startled them at first. They approached cautiously, following Elias' instructions carefully. "Gentle hands," he said, demonstrating how to stroke the animals calmly. "They respond to kindness, not fear." The twins listened and tried their best, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Each successful attempt brought a small spark of pride, something they had not felt in a long time. Elias moved among them patiently, correcting mistakes without scolding, teaching without harshness. He showed them how to feed the chickens, gather eggs, and water the crops. He explained the importance of routine, care, and responsibility, but also emphasized respect for the animals and the land. "Everything lives because we respect it," he said. "We are part of a bigger world and our actions matter." The twins absorbed his words, understanding that life on the ranch required not just effort but thoughtfulness and compassion. By midday, the sun had climbed high in the sky, and the twins were tired but exhilarated. They had learned more in a few hours than they had in months of wandering alone. Elias could see the change in them, the slow growth of confidence, the beginnings of trust in themselves and in someone else. He allowed them a short rest, giving them time to sit in the shade of a tree and watch the world around them. The twins spoke quietly, sharing small pieces of their past lives, their struggles, and their hopes. For the first time, they were not afraid of being judged. They were being heard. As the days passed, the twins' bond with Elias deepened. They began to see him not just as a protector, but as a teacher and mentor. He shared stories of his own life, of hardships he had faced, and lessons he had learned. The twins listened with rapt attention, finding inspiration in his words. They realized that life could be difficult, but there was always a way to survive with dignity and hope. Each story, each lesson, helped to build their character, giving them tools they would need to face the wider world someday. However, life on the ranch was not without challenges. The twins had never followed rules so strictly, and the structure of daily chores sometimes frustrated them. There were moments when they struggled with patience, when their instincts to run or hide from responsibility clashed with the expectations of ranch life. Elias did not scold them harshly. Instead, he encouraged them gently, guiding them through their mistakes and praising their efforts. Gradually, the twins learned that discipline was not punishment. It was a way to grow stronger and more capable. One afternoon, while mending a fence at the edge of the pasture, one of the twins faltered and almost fell. The fear of failure brought tears to their eyes, and for a moment, it seemed as if old habits of despair might return. Elias approached calmly, placing a reassuring hand on their shoulder. "Everyone stumbles sometimes," he said softly. "It is how we rise after falling that matters. You are stronger than you think." The twin nodded, swallowing their pride, and together they finished repairing the fence. The sense of accomplishment lit a small flame of confidence within them, a feeling they had not known in months. The ranch was more than a place to learn skills. It was a place of healing. The twins began to speak more openly about their fears and sadness, sharing memories of their parents and the loneliness of surviving alone. Elias listened with patience, offering comfort when needed, and helping them understand that their past did not define their future. They learned to process pain without letting it consume them, a lesson more valuable than any physical skill they could acquire. As they adjusted to life on the ranch, the twins began to take initiative. They helped with chores without being asked, showing a growing sense of responsibility and pride. They learned to care for the animals independently, tending to the horses and cows with gentle hands and careful attention. They worked together as a team, their bond as siblings becoming stronger under the guidance of Elia's quiet mentorship. Each day, they became more confident in their abilities and more secure in the knowledge that someone cared deeply for them. Word of the twins, new life slowly reached the town. Some townspeople were skeptical, unable to understand why Elias would devote his time and energy to two children who had once been labeled thieves. Others were quietly impressed, realizing that compassion and patience could achieve more than punishment ever could. The twins themselves were aware that their past actions might never be fully forgotten, but they also understood that they were building a new reputation, one based on trust, responsibility, and hard work. One evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and purple, Elias sat with the twins by the fence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "Life is full of choices," he said quietly. "You can choose fear, anger, and revenge, or you can choose courage, kindness, and learning. The path you take will shape your life." The twins listened, feeling the weight of his words. They had already chosen courage and trust by coming to the ranch, and they realized that each new decision, no matter how small, would continue to shape their future. There were moments of doubt, of course. The twins sometimes wondered if they truly belonged at the ranch, if they were capable of living up to Elia's expectations. But each challenge they faced, each task they completed, strengthened their confidence. They began to see themselves not as helpless children, but as capable, resilient young people with a future they could shape with their own hands. Through these lessons and experiences, the twins began to change in ways that were visible to anyone who observed them closely. Their eyes, once clouded with fear and despair, now held a spark of determination. Their movements, once hesitant and unsure, became more confident and deliberate. And perhaps most importantly, they learned to trust, not just Elias but themselves and the world around them. The quiet rancher continued to guide them patiently, never forcing, never rushing. He understood that transformation was a slow process, one that required time, care, and understanding. He knew that the twins had endured great hardship and that trust, once broken, could not be rushed. But he also recognized that every small success, every lesson learned, and every act of kindness contributed to building their resilience and character. As weeks turned into months, the twins grew stronger, wiser, and more capable. They learned not just how to survive, but how to live with purpose, integrity, and hope. They came to understand that mistakes did not define them, but their willingness to learn and grow did. And through it all, Elias remained a steady presence in their lives, a mentor, protector, and friend who had chosen to intervene when the world had been ready to turn its back. By the time the first cool winds of autumn began to sweep across the ranch, the twins were no longer the frightened, desperate children who had been tied to a post in the town square. They had been transformed by patience, guidance, and the quiet courage of one man who had refused to ignore their plight. And while challenges still lay ahead, they faced the future with confidence, hope, and a sense of belonging they had never known before. In those months on the ranch, the twins learned not only the practical skills needed for survival, but also the deeper lessons of empathy, courage, and resilience. They discovered that life could be harsh, yes, but also kind and rewarding when met with patience, care, and the willingness to grow. And through it all, the quiet rancher, Elias, watched with pride and satisfaction, knowing that his decision to intervene had changed the course of their lives forever. The mornings on the ranch had begun to feel different for the twins. Where once each day had been a struggle for survival, filled with fear and uncertainty, now their days were guided by routine, responsibility, and the quiet presence of Elias. The ranch was a world of work, but also a world of discovery, where each day brought a new lesson, a new challenge, and a small victory. The twins had come a long way since that hot day in the town square when they had been tied to a post for stealing bread. Now they were learning not just how to survive, but how to thrive, under the patient guidance of the quiet rancher. That morning, Elias had assigned them a new task. "Today," he said, "you will gather the eggs and feed the chickens on your own. Remember what I taught you. Be gentle and patient and observe the animals carefully." The twins nodded, both eager and nervous. They knew that Elias had faith in them, but this was the first time they would be completing this task without him standing beside them. They understood that responsibility came with both trust and accountability. The twins approached the chicken coop cautiously. The birds clucked and pecked at the ground, moving nervously as the twins entered. They remembered Elias' instructions: speak softly, move slowly, and never make sudden gestures. One twin reached out to collect an egg, and the other steadied the basket, ready to gather the rest. Their hands were careful, their movements deliberate, and each egg they collected became a small triumph. With every step, their confidence grew, and they began to feel the quiet pride of accomplishment. After finishing the morning chores, Elias asked them to help with the cattle. They had grown used to the large, gentle animals, but herding them still required focus, patience, and understanding. The twins moved together, following Elias' instructions as he guided them from a distance. "Lead with calm, not force," he reminded them. "Animals respond to confidence, not fear." At first, they hesitated, unsure of how the cows would react. But gradually, they found a rhythm, learning to anticipate the animals' movements, communicate through gestures and tone, and work together seamlessly. The twins began to see the results of their hard work. The ranch ran more smoothly with their help, and they themselves felt stronger and more capable. Elias encouraged them at every step, offering praise when they succeeded and gentle correction when they faltered. His guidance was patient, never harsh, and the twins learned that mistakes were not failures, but opportunities to grow. The trust that Elias placed in them inspired them to believe in themselves, something they had never experienced in the harsh streets of the town. Despite the progress they were making, the twins were still haunted by their past. Memories of being tied to the post, the angry faces of the townspeople, and the constant hunger they had endured lingered in their minds. Elias recognized this and decided it was time for them to face those fears, to confront their past in a way that would help them heal and grow stronger. "You cannot run from what happened," he said one evening as the sun dipped low in the sky. "But you can learn from it, and you can choose to move forward." With Elias' guidance, the twins began to take small steps toward the town. Their task was simple: to deliver some supplies to a neighboring family who had requested eggs and milk. For the twins, it was a challenge not just of physical skill, but of courage. They had feared the town before, associating it with judgment and punishment. Now they would return not as frightened children, but as responsible young people carrying gifts and demonstrating their trustworthiness. The journey to the neighboring family was filled with small lessons. The twins learned to navigate the dusty roads, to watch for hazards, and to approach the townspeople respectfully. Each step was a test of their independence and confidence. When they arrived, they were greeted with curiosity. Some neighbors remembered the twins from before, while others saw them for the first time. The twins delivered the eggs and milk with care, explaining politely that they had been raised by Elias and were learning to care for the animals responsibly. To their surprise, the neighbors were impressed. They praised the twins for their hard work and thanked them for the delivery. The twins felt a sense of pride that was entirely new to them. They realized that the world could be kind when met with honesty, effort, and respect. This small victory reinforced the lessons Elias had taught them, that trust, responsibility and courage could open doors, even in a world that had once seemed harsh and unforgiving. Returning to the ranch, the twins reflected on their journey. They discussed how much they had learned in just a few months, how to care for animals, work together, and face challenges without fear. They also recognized the importance of guidance and mentorship. Without Elias, they would not have had the support, knowledge, or patience needed to grow in this way. They began to understand that life was not just about survival. It was about learning, growing, and becoming stronger, both physically and emotionally. The seasons began to change, and with them came new challenges on the ranch. Autumn winds swept through the fields, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of frost. The twins were tasked with preparing the barns for the coming winter, ensuring that the animals would be safe and comfortable during the cold months. It was hard work, requiring both physical effort and careful planning. The twins approached it with determination, motivated by the lessons they had learned and the pride they felt in their growing abilities. Elias watched them closely, noting their progress. He saw how far they had come from the frightened, hungry children tied to a post in the town square. He was proud, not just of their physical skills, but of their growth as individuals. They had learned patience, responsibility, and resilience. They had learned that mistakes were part of the learning process, and that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. One day, while repairing a section of the fence, one of the twins expressed a concern. "Elias," they said, "what if the townspeople never forgive us? What if they always see us as thieves?" Elias paused, looking at them with calm eyes. "People will always judge," he said softly. "But what matters is what you choose to become, not what they think of you. You cannot control others, but you can control your actions, your effort, and your character. That is what defines you." The twins reflected on his words, feeling their truth deeply. They realized that the approval of others was less important than their own growth and integrity. With Elias' guidance, they began to focus more on their own abilities, their work, and their relationships, rather than fearing judgment. They discovered a sense of empowerment, understanding that they were capable of shaping their own future, one action at a time. As winter approached, the twins became integral parts of the ranch. They could handle most tasks independently, from feeding the animals to repairing fences, and even managing small emergencies when Elias was occupied. Their confidence had grown, and their bond with each other and with Elias was stronger than ever. They had learned not just survival skills, but life skills, responsibility, courage, empathy, and the value of hard work. Evenings were often spent by the fire, with Elias sharing stories of the land, the animals, and his own life experiences. The twins listened attentively, learning lessons of patience, wisdom, and moral courage. They understood that life was a journey, with challenges to face and lessons to learn along the way. These quiet moments were just as important as the hard work of the day, shaping their hearts and minds as much as their hands and bodies. Through all of this, the twins began to see themselves differently. They were no longer defined by fear, hunger, or the mistakes of their past. They were capable, resilient, and full of potential. They understood the power of guidance, trust, and patience, and how one person's quiet courage could change the course of a life. Elias had not only saved them from immediate danger, but he had given them the tools to face the world with confidence, integrity, and hope. By the end of the year, the twins had grown stronger in body, mind, and spirit. They had transformed from frightened, desperate children into young individuals who understood responsibility, respect, and the importance of kindness. They had learned that life, though challenging, offered opportunities for growth, courage, and success. And through it all, Elias remained their quiet guide, their mentor, and their protector, proving that patience, understanding, and compassion could truly change the fate of those who needed it most. Years had passed since the Apache twins had first been tied to the post in the small desert town. The memory of that hot, dusty day never completely left them, but it had been transformed from a memory of fear into a reminder of how far they had come. Under Elia's quiet guidance, they had grown into young adults, strong in both body and spirit, with a sense of responsibility and hope that once seemed impossible. Life on the ranch had taught them more than survival. It had taught them courage, kindness, and the power of trust. The twins now handled the ranch largely on their own. Elias, older and slower than before, watched with quiet pride as they tended to the animals, repaired fences, and managed the daily chores. Their skills were impressive, but what impressed him most was the way they approached life, with patience, thoughtfulness, and care. They no longer reacted out of fear or desperation. Instead, they made careful choices, thinking not only of themselves but of others. Despite the peace and routine of ranch life, the twins understood that the world beyond the ranch was not always kind. They had heard rumors of hardship and injustice in the nearby towns and villages. Some people still remembered them as the children who had once stolen bread, and there were whispers among travelers and merchants who passed by. Yet, the twins no longer felt the crushing weight of fear or shame. They had learned that the opinions of others did not define their worth. Their actions, integrity, and hard work did. One spring morning, Elias suggested a new challenge. "It's time," he said softly, "for you to step into the world beyond the ranch. You have learned the skills, the courage, and the heart needed to face it. You must carry what you have learned with you." The twins felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The world beyond the ranch was unknown, full of risks, but also full of opportunity. They understood that this was a chance to test themselves, to grow further, and to show the world the people they had become. Their first task was simple but significant: deliver a message to a nearby town about the sale of some cattle. It required them to travel alone, interact with townspeople, and handle minor negotiations. The twins approached the journey with careful planning. They packed provisions, reviewed what Elias had taught them, and set out with confidence that had once been unimaginable. Each step they took on the dusty road reminded them of their first journey to the ranch, when every step had been filled with fear. Now, the fear had been replaced with determination. When they arrived at the town, they were met with curiosity and surprise. Some merchants recognized them as the children who had once caused trouble, while others saw them for the first time. The twins carried themselves with dignity, speaking politely, handling the cattle responsibly, and showing competence that drew admiration. Slowly, the townspeople began to see them not as troublemakers, but as capable, responsible young adults. Each interaction was a small victory, a step in reshaping their reputation and proving the lessons they had learned at the ranch. News of their abilities spread quietly. People began to respect the twins for their hard work and reliability. They helped neighbors with small tasks, assisted in the care of animals, and shared what they had learned from Elias. Slowly but surely, the community began to recognize that these were not the same frightened children who had once stolen bread. They were young people who had been given a chance and had used it wisely. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Elias reflected on the journey of the twins. He had seen them grow from desperate, hungry children into capable, confident individuals. His quiet courage in stepping forward years ago had not only saved their lives, but it had given them the tools to rewrite their own story. He understood that the true reward of mentorship was not just immediate gratitude, but the lasting impact it had on the lives of those he had helped. As the twins continued to grow and explore the world beyond the ranch, they also began to give back. They taught younger children on the reservation about caring for animals, tending to crops, and handling life's challenges with courage and responsibility. They shared the lessons Elias had taught them, showing that kindness, patience, and guidance could change lives. The twins had become living examples of what one person's compassion could achieve. Despite their successes, the twins remained humble. They knew that life was not always easy and that challenges would continue to come their way. But they also knew that they had the skills, the resilience and the support of each other, and Elias, to face whatever arose. They had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it, and that true strength came from kindness, understanding, and perseverance. One day, many years after they had first arrived at the ranch, the twins returned to the small desert town where their journey had nearly ended in tragedy. They walked through the streets with heads held high, no longer the frightened children of the past. They visited the old general store, now run by a new shopkeeper, and left a small gift of food for those in need. The townspeople watched in silence, some curious, some amazed. They saw not criminals, but young adults who had endured hardship, learned, and grown into responsible, compassionate people. The twins' return to the town was symbolic. It was a demonstration of resilience, of redemption, and of the power of second chances. People began to speak of them with respect, recognizing the journey they had taken and the lessons they embodied. They had transformed their lives through hard work, courage, and the quiet guidance of Elias, and in doing so, they had changed the perception of others as well. Elias, who had accompanied them on part of the journey, felt a quiet satisfaction. He had taken a risk when he intervened years ago, and that risk had yielded a life full of purpose, dignity, and hope for the twins. He realized that the smallest act of courage, choosing to help when it was easier to walk away, could ripple outward, transforming not just one life, but many. The twins were living proof of this truth. As the years continued, the twins remained close to the ranch and to Elias, who had become a father figure, mentor, and friend. They managed much of the ranch independently, mentoring others who were struggling, just as they had once been helped. They never forgot their past, but they also refused to be defined by it. Instead, they used their experiences to guide, teach, and inspire those around them. The story of the Apache twins became known quietly across the surrounding towns and reservations. People spoke of their journey from despair to hope, from hunger and fear to skill and confidence. It was a story of courage, compassion, and the profound impact one person's kindness could have on another's life. The twins themselves never sought fame or recognition. Their focus was always on living rightly, helping others, and honoring the lessons they had learned. In their hearts, the twins always remembered the day they were tied to the post in the hot sun, the day when despair had seemed absolute. But they also remembered Elias, the quiet rancher who had intervened, who had seen them not as thieves, but as children in need. His courage, patience, and compassion had given them a chance to learn, grow, and thrive. That single act had changed the course of their lives, teaching them that even in a harsh and unforgiving world, kindness and courage could prevail. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in deep reds and golds, the twins stood together on the ranch, watching the animals settle for the night. They felt a sense of peace and fulfillment. Their journey had been long and challenging, but they had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next. They understood that life's difficulties were part of the journey, but so were its rewards. And through it all, they carried with them the lessons of Elias, that compassion, courage, and perseverance could change not just lives, but destinies. The Apache twins had been given a second chance, and they had seized it fully. They had transformed from desperate, fearful children into strong, responsible, and compassionate young adults. Their story was a testament to the power of mentorship, the importance of kindness, and the enduring impact of one person who chooses to act with courage when others might look away. And in the quiet, wide-open spaces of the ranch, their legacy of hope and resilience would continue, inspiring others for generations to come.